Okay, welcome to episode 5 of the podcast. Welcome to Adjacent Pod. I'm sorry about the week off. My travel schedule had me traveling to Miami for a bit for some meetings. And just a heads up that next week we're going to be off as well. I'm actually headed back to my alma mater of Cornell to guest lecture for the week in the entrepreneurship classes. Before I get going today and talk about our guest, I kind of wanted to take a moment to first thank our sponsors. I want to do this at the top because they've done so much to help this podcast get going. The first one is Treeline Veterinary Care, or Treeline Veterinary Cancer Care for pets in a boutique setting. Lalchandani Simon, a boutique technology and healthcare law firm who obviously makes this podcast possible. Before I dig into today's topic, which is kind of the international crypto legal landscape, I wanted to chat about something that happened this week. You know, this podcast is directed at young entrepreneurs, people trying to build something, corporate execs who are, on a mission. And I want to talk about kind of when wrenches get thrown into their world. I started this week and we had a pretty big week. We had the episode and a bunch of meetings for the law firm and for from the other ventures. And I got a call yesterday from our vet who basically said that our dog, who, if you know me, is one of the most important things in my life, had a little blockage in his small intestine. And it has just thrown a massive curve into my week. He went into surgery last night, and I will be able to pick him up today. He had a portion of his small intestine taken out, and it's just kind of a crazy, unexpected thing that happens. And I think it's a lesson that, as you're building your company or you're working on that case or whatever it is that you're doing, you get bogeys thrown at you and you have to deal with them. And this one certainly upended me, but all good news now. And I just I wanted to share that lesson because it's something that I'm reminded of that, and at any moment things can change and you have to be versatile and readily able to adapt to it. So that's the lesson that I learned this week. So with that, I want to bring on our guest. Our guest is George Morris, partner at Simmons & Simmons. Now, George and I had this amazing opportunity to work together when I was representing Structure Financial. Basically, Structure Financial wanted to creep into markets around the globe, and we needed someone to help navigate that effort. And if you don't know, Simmons & Simmons has this amazing navigator product where they've just done surveys of the laws in various countries that kind of allow you to do one-stop shopping to enter various markets in the securities world. And we started looking into that product, and we're thinking about just purchasing that product, exclusively. And then I think it was, and we'll talk to George about this, but I think we had just a meeting to talk about the product. And I was so impressed with these guys as they laid out things and what they did, that they ended up coming on as kind of co-counsel for our international effort. So with that, I wanted to bring on George Morris of Simmons & Simmons. Welcome to the podcast, George.
Thanks, Kubs. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for bringing me on board.
I know I've already asked you, but can you share with the audience where you find yourself right now?
Yeah, so I'm at home. So I live just outside London, just north of London. Lived here for about 10 years now, and I've been working in London for coming up 18 years now. So never worked anywhere other than Simmons & Simmons. It's been my home ever since I trained as a lawyer.
That is rare to stay with one law firm for your entire career, but I think it's also noble, and it's coming back into vogue, I think. So for the audience members, what is the specific town that you're in right now? And I think more importantly, what is your hometown football team?
So I live in a town called Harpenden, which is, as I said, north of London. We don't have our own football team, but very close by to us, we've got Luton Town, and Luton is was a first division. Not very much into football, I must admit. They're a first division team, but they got promoted to the Premiership last year, I think, beginning of last year. They didn't do so well, but yeah. So Luton Town are my hometown, but I guess my heart is, I went to university in Liverpool, so I guess the football team I've seen the most would be Liverpool, because I went to Anfield a lot when I was at university years and years ago.
I used to live in Spain and became a huge football fan. And I think with the advent of Ted Lasso here in the United States, every American is now slowly becoming more and more of a football fan. So I think a lot of the people are going to be very interested in what you did, and the amount of people searching for Ludenton is going to go up by a factor of 3 just after this episode. Well, okay, let's that. You and I met representing a crypto company internationally, but let's go back. How did you get your start into the crypto world?
Yeah, so like I say, I've been at Simmons my whole career. So I started at Simmons back in September 2007 as a trainee.
Sure.
But actually qualified as a tech and telecoms lawyer, doing lots of data protection, data security, commercial contracts, IT outsourcing, all that kind of thing in
What
2009.
year are we in right now?
This is 2009 when I qualified as a
Okay.
lawyer. So you do 2 years
Okay.
of training in the UK, 2 years of training, and then you qualify. So I started 2007, qualified 2009. And then, so I was doing that kind of work until about 2015. So I was about 5, 6 years qualified. And I got introduced by a trainee at Simmons to his housemate, who was a guy who was the chief technical officer of a very small crypto brokerage in London. And this was literally like, this was obviously before the ICO boom of 2017 and the first big bull runs. And so he introduced me to this guy. This guy was, his business was looking for a little bit of regulatory support. So at the time, no one in the UK or Europe had really done anything to do with crypto in a regulatory sense. And so I thought, well, why not, right? I'm looking for a good sort of business to make partner from, because at Simmons, you don't just get made partner. You've got to come to the table with a business case and revenue and things. And I thought, this could be my niche. Like, who knows? It might work out. It was tiny at the time.
How
Um,
long how long had you been at Simmons when you started having these thoughts?
that was so I was 7 or 8 years qualified at this point. Sorry,
Okay.
7 or 8 years in. I was about 6 years qualified at this point.
So
So
we're in 2016, 2017.
yeah, 2015, 2016. Yeah,
Oh,
that's right.
2015, 2016. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll be 10 years this year in the space. So I did that piece of work for them, but at the time the industry was very small, and they essentially they were quite happy with what I did. These guys were kind of classic like crypto entrepreneurs. They had the Lambos, they hold all the nice stuff, but really young guys, and they didn't want to speak to kind of old school partners
Sure.
who wanted to give them the black letter law. They wanted someone who was a bit younger, kind of understood where they were coming from. And so after I did that piece of work for them, they introduced me around the industry in the UK, very small industry. There wasn't much money to be made as a law firm, but I just thought, well, it'd be a nice thing to do, right? It's a good. I like these guys. I like the space. The industry is really interesting. Why not just keep going and see what I can make of it? And then 2016 was pretty good. There was stuff happening, but not many of the clients had a huge amount of money. There wasn't a massive amount of revenue to be made in crypto at the time. And then 2017 happened, though, and that was the first big bull run. And really, that was when my practice really started to take off, because we started to see asset values going up. At the end of 2017, Bitcoin hit
Sure.
$20,000. That was the first really big number. And suddenly these clients found themselves with a lot of ambition, but also suddenly they had the money to be able to scale. And so we started to pick up instructions from those clients doing, international regulatory work, scaling work, kind of similar to what you were describing, Cubs, about how we did it with structure, but
Sure.
much more kind of crypto native. And really, that was the start of it. And through that, met new people, picked up new work, worked for bigger and bigger firms. Now the practice is fantastic. We work for all the big centralized exchanges, custodians, lots of TradFi entities that are coming into the space. And as you know, of course, kind of the intersection between crypto and TradFi, where it comes to
Sure.
like tokenized derivatives and things like that, it's now a big market for us. So it's gone from 2015, the very first instruction, to now. It's been an amazing 10 years. Just absolutely fascinating and fantastic, really.
Well, let me put a bookmark in that first 2015 representation to the extent you can. What kind of work were you doing? And this is for like the young lawyers out there saying, "Hey, I'm a crypto lawyer. I was doing something." Like, what exactly were you up to?
So yeah, so obviously I can't give any names or anything, but what I can
Sure,
say
of
is
course.
that they came to us because they were running a brokerage based in London, and at the time there was zero crypto regulation, pretty much anywhere really. I mean, the first place
Sure.
probably to regulate crypto was Germany, and then Abu Dhabi did it, but that we're talking now 2016, 2017. So 2015 there was nothing. And these guys were running a fairly successful, if relatively small, brokerage business. And the FCA had come to them, the Financial Conduct Authorities, the regulator in the UK, they'd come to them, to these guys, and said, we'd like just to understand what you guys are doing to work out if you should be regulated or not. So we helped them to answer that question. And it was a
And when you
very
say brokerage business, they were offering the buying and selling of different tokens.
Exactly. Yeah. So they were
Okay.
just they didn't have their own liquidity. They were basically at the time it was a very nascent market, of course. So sourcing liquidity and things was a very specialized activity. There weren't many liquidity pools out there you could easily plug into. DeFi
Sure.
wasn't really a thing. So they had a great idea to be able to create a kind of user friendly way of being able to get retail customers into crypto and kind of bridge the gap between the liquidity providers, of which there weren't many, and the retail customers, of which there weren't that many either, but there were some people who were quite willing to put quite a lot of money into this. So, yeah, it was a great business. It was just very small. And then, yeah, the FCA asked them, what are you guys doing? Not in an aggressive sense, but they said, we'd
Yeah.
like to understand it. It was probably the first thing the FCA had ever looked at in crypto. So we helped them out. And then some of those guys moved to other places and instructed us. Some of them introduced us to other people, just got to know people really through
Oh yeah.
that very
It's like,
first instruction.
wow, that is incredible. One of the things that I keep, trying to explain to people is that for a long time there were no laws that applied to virtual currencies.
Yeah.
So what were you looking at? Were you looking at securities laws or traditional financial regulations as you were advising them?
Yeah, so I guess for those of the listeners on this call who are US based, I guess it's kind of what we were doing is very similar to what you guys until recently were doing, was looking at just how crypto fits within securities laws,
Sure.
because we had nothing else. The good thing about the UK and the EU, as compared to the position that you guys used to have in the US, is that our securities laws are quite well defined in terms of, this type of thing is regulated, that type of thing is regulated. Whereas you guys have got the Howey test. It's like, here's this amorphous blob of things that may be regulated. So obviously it was much easier for your regulators to try and fit crypto into that world. Whereas with us, actually, in the UK and in Europe, we've never, that securities regulation so specific in what they regulate, that actually what we were doing was working out, does this stuff fit within it? Fairly quickly established that brokerage in relation to Bitcoin or other classic exchange tokens just wasn't captured by the regs at all. The things that really got us interested were when the ICO boom happened. We didn't do a huge number of initial coin offerings, but the ones that we did do were, obviously they looked quite a lot like securities offerings, even though the assets that they were offering didn't quite fit within the securities definitions. Some of them looked a lot like sort of funds and things like that, because they were like, put your money in, get a token, and then you can sell the token later for more money after we've bought this asset and managed it, etc., which looks a lot like in the UK as a collective investment scheme is the concept. So there was a lot of that
Sure.
type of work looking at whether the ICOs as a concept would themselves be some kind of regulated product. So that was a big part of 2016 and 2017.
The ICOs.
Yeah, well, to an extent, it was lots and lots of
Seems early.
yeah, it was lots of crypto structuring and things like that. So ICOs were definitely a part of it, but there was also a lot of kind of scaling of businesses, and then really 2017 moved into 18, which was really where we started to do the proper cross-border stuff, because 2018 was when we started to engage with the bigger centralized exchanges, and they at the time were very, very focused on international expansion. So you had some exchanges who were live in one or two countries in 2017, 2018, and then they come to us and say, we want to be live in 100 countries in 6 months' time. And you'd be like, okay. So then we'd use our Navigator network to be able to basically
Sure.
give them a roadmap as to how to go live in all these countries, which created this incredible, the work product that we got out of that was fantastic, because it meant that we gained a huge amount of knowledge and experience of how crypto is regulated across the world. And that really was sort of the start of, that was when it was really supercharged from there on. Like, it was 2015 was small, 16 and 17 were great, but 18 onwards, it's just been massive exponential growth ever since. And the one thing we've always tried to do is, we've never been like, we see other law firms do this all the time. When the industry is up, everyone's like piling in because they want to take
Sure.
some of a slice of that pie. We've been in it when it's been up, down, round and about. We've always been advising in this space. I mean, I've been 100% focused on crypto. It's all I do at Simmons ever since 2017, probably. And
Well,
that,
I got a couple questions about that, but before I jump on that, you and I met because of that Navigator product. Like,
Mhm.
the smart folks at Structure found it, they brought it to me, and I'm like, this is exactly what you guys need. Whose idea, if you can reveal, or how did that product come about? I imagine it was a collaboration of different people saying, "Hey, we ought to do this." And just so you know, like, in the U.S., we have, obviously, there's 50 states and 50 different regulatory environments for money transmitters. And one of the things that, I started thinking about when we first started doing crypto was creating a product like the Navigator product, but just for the money transmitter license in the United States. But it was based on that concept. So I'm very curious about the origin of how that came to be. And I also will tell you, it's a very novel and new way of practicing law that doesn't really exist, creating these kind of boxed products as opposed to general retention and counsel. So I'm very curious on how that came to be.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating story, and I must admit I probably don't know all of it, but I can give you some background because Navigator, I think now as a product, if you consider the revenue that it generates for Simmons, it's something like the fifth biggest client of the firm, if you put it that way. Like
You
in
are
terms of
kidding.
just
Really?
revenue, it's massive. Yeah.
Can
So
you, just for the audience, do a better job of describing what Navigator is? And
yeah,
hopefully there's some potential clients listening to this.
of course. So Navigator essentially answers the question of I'm a bank based in one country, and I want to be able to sell my securities product in another country or in 100 other countries. But I need to understand not just what my home state regulation is, which I know already because I'm regulated here. I need to know what the law is in all of the countries where all of my potential clients are based, so I can understand how to be able to sell cross border. So what Navigator does is it enables a bank or an asset manager, or there's any number of different Navigator products now that are designed for different types of clients. But the classic one that I think the original one was Navigator Funds, which is essentially how do I sell my fund into a different jurisdiction. So it helps an asset manager to understand if I've got a client in a country over there, what's the rules around how I market to those people, what I can say to them, how many people I can talk to, can I fly there and actually physically be in the country, or do I have to stay offshore? Do I have to register the fund? All that kind of stuff. That
Sure.
was that first product was created back. I'm gonna say it's 15 years ago, and I think it may have been a bit more than that now. But it was created by a very clever partner that we've got called Charlotte Stahl, and Charlotte is a very senior individual within our financial services regulatory team. And she created this product off the back of an instruction we had from a large asset manager. I forget exactly which one, but it's a household name. And they essentially instructed us to create this sort of massive matrix of different arrangements across the world for fund marketing. And we essentially said, that's great. We're very happy to do that. Why don't we charge you less, but we have the right to be able to turn it into a product? And so we essentially kind of we used the work product from that to turn it into Navigator, which is a subscription-based product that you can
Sure.
essentially you can buy to enable you to understand how cross-border activities work. So Navigator
That is such
Funds was the
the
first. Sorry, go for it.
that's just such the antithesis of the way lawyers think these days. So I'm just like in awe of whoever said, you know what, can we lower our price now and what we charge you and let us take this product and sell it elsewhere? And I just, it kind of blows my mind that a lawyer said that because a business person would see that right away. A lawyer would be like, no, that's our private work product, blah, blah, blah. And, it went the other way and inured to the benefit of Simmons and Simmons.
Exactly. No, we got lucky. I mean, Charlotte is a very impressive individual. She's got a very good
Where
brain
is she
for the
based?
business. She's based in London. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Sorry, I
yeah,
cut
she
you off. Keep going.
no. So I was saying yeah. So Charlotte, it was her baby. She created it, and it's now a massive. We have 30 or 40 people that work for Charlotte, just doing kind of Navigator updating and things. There's loads of different Navigator products. So funds, I think, was the first one. Then we've got Navigator derivatives, which is the one we used for structure. And then there's Navigator tax, there's Navigator banking, lending, various other kind of basically kind of financial services type products. Then we've used that. So that sort of model enabled us to have this network of all these different law firms around the world who we obviously use our own offices, but we're only in 22 countries, which is pretty good, but
Sure.
not doesn't cover the whole world. So we have all these different Navigator Council who are law firms in other countries that we've worked with for years, who support us on Navigator, and obviously they get referrals from clients who use Navigator, and they update it when things change in different jurisdictions. But what that enabled us to do in the crypto world was, Navigator's great and it helps us with the derivatives products and things like that, but it then enabled us to use that network of law firms to be able to do the cross-border analysis for crypto
Sure.
firms when it came to crypto regulation. And we've now created a product called Crypto Reviewer, which is a few years old now, but it's essentially Navigator for crypto as well. And
That's
so that,
incredible.
that does the same thing, but with a crypto, specifically for crypto regulation, which has been a great
You,
product for us as well.
I remember when we were working together, we would get these reports, and from different, small, tiny law firms in kind of far-flung countries. And they were just, your partners in those local jurisdictions providing you information for us to then kind of metabolize and take in and see if that was a market that we wanted to expand into. I'm kind of blown away and just incredibly impressed with that way of practicing law, because the way you can look at it is, sure, I'm sure it's a massive revenue driver for you, but it's also kind of, commoditizing the practice of law, right? Instead of selling your counsel and your services on the hourly rate, you're now selling a product which can sometimes cannibalize your other, service product. And so I commend Simmons & Simmons, because taking the gamble obviously was very rewarding for the firm, but in my opinion, it could have gone the other way. Somebody subscribes to this and then kind of takes it and runs with it. Like if I were at a big law firm, I could have just subscribed to Navigator, had access to this information, and then easily recreated it and marketed it as my own. So I think it's amazing that you guys did that.
Yeah, I think that is a risk, definitely. I think that the thing that's been really beneficial to us is that it works really well for kind of highly commoditized products that the clients are selling. The thing that then and that's work that we no longer get, but I think it's work that no law firms get anymore, because actually what
Sure.
we've done, Navigator now sucks in all that work from everybody. It all comes to Navigator,
Sure.
or unfortunately we now have competitors in the space as well, of course. But one thing it does do is it means when the banks or the asset managers or the investment banks want to do more complex products, which is obviously quite regular, they come straight to us because we've got that international network. Navigator
Yeah.
doesn't answer kind of the question they've got, on this brand new product they want to launch that's super complex. So they come to us for that. And actually, I think what we find is that we get the subscription revenue, but then also I think we now have a reputation for that cross-border work in the much more complex space.
What's it's really interesting is, as somebody who went through this decision-making process, when our client was expanding, the choices that I had as, the kind of the outside general counsel was to say, hey, we can go pick markets and then retain counsel there to kind of understand how to navigate those regulations, or we can find one council that has a presence there. And at the markets they were looking at, that was going to be very difficult. So you guys just kind of perfectly fit into that space of having a network that could reach into those markets on our behalf and not have to go find individualized ad hoc lawyers in every place. So it was an incredible fit for a company's need. So that brings me to my next question. Are you seeing a lot of that now? Like a lot of companies who are building, crypto, DeFi, Web3 products that say, gosh, the world is our oyster. We want to expand, but then they need to come to talk to somebody like you.
Yeah, I mean it's been a big part of the practice for the last 7 or 8 years. I think that instruction has been a classic one for us. The interesting thing I'd say actually is that with the change in the US, that actually a lot of firms are starting to think actually the US is open to us a little bit more, and so there is a bit. Whereas a couple of years back, expanding into Europe, expanding internationally was their core focus, because actually everyone was trying to get away from their US focus and really kind of made sure that they were hedged against potential US exposure. Now I
Sure.
think it's the opposite, in that there's still obviously a lot of international interest, but a lot of focus internally has shifted back to US expansion, because Obviously, it's an open goal at the moment, so it's still happening. But I think we are seeing some focus moving back towards the US, which is good for you guys.
You know what's funny is at the end in a little bit we're gonna do kind of a five quick questions segment with you, but you kind of touched on one of the questions that I was gonna ask you down the road is will we see George Morris coming to the U.S. to practice? Is that something on the horizon with everything that's happening here and the money that's flowing into this industry? I, you seem like a guy that should be here bringing his clients to the U.S.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the one thing I've always been nervous about with the US is that the your legal system is so different to ours. Like I'm always so confused whenever I look at US regulations. I'm just like, why is it all in capital letters and it's all very big? But
You know what's funny is we think the opposite. Whenever somebody talks about, the common law system, they talk about like, England and India and Australia, they were built on the same foundation so that, they're with obvious differences, they're very interchangeable because you think about precedents and all the other ways of thinking about how to interpret the law. So it's funny to hear the opposite side when you say it's so different because it's we found it on the same system.
I think yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because I think actually in reality, the type of work that I do, which is all financial services regulatory
Yeah.
now, essentially, it's all been derived in the UK. It's been derived mostly from European law. So
Yeah.
we don't have a huge amount of kind of like the common law is not so relevant when it comes to financial services regulation in the UK these
Sure.
days. And also I do practice a lot of European law as well, particularly on things
Which is
like
all code
compliance and
based, right?
derivatives. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Very, very regulatory focused, lots and lots of guidance, lots of kind of level two measures and that kind of thing. We don't have a huge amount of case law in this space. So actually, it is a little bit sort of weird when you come to the US and you see that your primary securities, what you look at to determine if something's a security is a case about orange
Yeah.
groves from back in the whenever it was the 30s or
But
whatever.
doesn't that give you more flexibility? Because now you have the ability to interpret as opposed to being limited to the specific regulation that was passed. You can, interpret it, broadly and make an argument for that kind of, definition of something.
You'd hope, yeah, you'd hope, but it's yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing we always think about when it comes to the US legal market is obviously incredibly competitive.
Yeah.
Of course, you guys have got a huge amount of activity going on in the
Yeah.
US on the legal side. You've got some really big hitters there. We're obviously as a law firm we don't have any US presence, so we always partner up with our law firms. Big US law firms that pick up some of the stuff. So I think that's
Sure.
probably going to be the short to
The
medium
the
term
mode to come
solution.
in.
Yeah, yeah.
You know that's a good segue into my next question is, why do you think that the US as it relates to kind of the world of crypto, why do you think the US and then, other countries take such a different view or up till now have taken such a different view of it? It's much easier to expand into European countries and, Asian countries than it is to come into the US. What is driving that kind of different paradigm?
So I think the what we see mostly, I think, from having looked at regulation across the world in this space, is that most of the places that regulate it most aggressively are the ones where you have the most retail activity. So you guys, obviously, in the US, you've got a huge amount of retail spending in the crypto world. You've got a
Sure.
massive amount of new launches, so a huge amount of new projects coming out of the US, of course. And as a result, I think the regulators traditionally in the US have been trying to keep the genie in the bottle when it's been forcing its way out. Other jurisdictions like the UK, that kind of thing, Europe, it's we do have a reasonable amount of activity. Retail activity is quite significant. I can't remember the stats, but I think it's something like a third of adults in the UK own crypto now, which is quite a lot. Um, but it's not been quite as kind of crazy, I'd say, as the US has traditionally been. So there
Sure.
hasn't been that need to really kind of keep a lid on it as much. We haven't seen the same amount of kind of retail exposure to large failures that we did in the US that I think made everyone a little bit nervous.
A little bit
Plus, I
nervous,
think
yeah.
you guys have a different dynamic when it comes to your the sort of the way that the US dollar works, obviously the global reserve currency, etc. I don't think that the Fed ever wanted to see Bitcoin starting to question the sovereignty of the US state over
Sure.
the global currency, whereas we just don't have that question in the UK or the EU. It's much less of a concern, so that's part of it.
So it's
But
consumer protection driven is kind of what you're saying.
that's always been my feeling. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's certainly how now when we look at the UK and Europe, how they regulate it, it's very much consumer driven first and foremost. Obviously, also massive concerns on the AML side of things. So
For
that's
sure.
that's been a continuing focus, and we have, of course, seen a lot of activity in that in recent months. So yeah,
Believe
that
me,
seems to be the way.
we do a lot of like legal opinions and memos as companies are growing. And I always tell the client, like, every morning I wake up, something new happens that changes the memo. It's kind of just a very dynamic field right now. And it's kind of exciting. Also a little bit, I think it makes our job very difficult
Yeah,
because we are trying to give advice and the ground upon which we are given advice is constantly moving and shifting.
yeah,
So
totally
with
agree.
that, I kind of want to talk about, I don't want to lose the opportunity to kind of tap into your brain and say, hey, where is the crypto world going in the future? And not only from a product standpoint, but from a jurisdictional standpoint. And the question I hope you answer in your response is there a jurisdiction that is kind of bubbling up as kind of well thought out landscape that's going to attract more businesses, more consumers, or more origination? Like, you and I went to the BVI when we were, creating a company, a few years ago. Is there a new jurisdiction that has created a friendly regulatory world for crypto DeFi companies that is now getting a lot of attention, or you think will get a lot of attention?
Yeah, no, it's a good question because what we've seen, when I started practicing 2015, 16, 17, there was a huge choice of where to go to set up your business in a way that was highly unregulated, basically. And that for a
Sure.
long time was sort of the key question that we used to get was where should we set our company up in a way that's kind of efficient and not too kind of burdensome from a regulatory perspective. There used to be a lot of answers to that question. Now the answers are very, very few because crypto regulation has proliferated throughout the world,
Sure.
primarily as a result of the Financial Action Task Force, which has required countries across the world to establish registration regimes for crypto firms
Sure.
to combat money laundering. So we've seen that across countries like BVI and Cayman that used to be obvious choices for setting up crypto firms now have fairly stringent regimes around crypto regulation. Um, we have obviously the EU with its own kind of bespoke framework, the markets and crypto assets regulation, which I'll come back to that shortly. But there are some jurisdictions that are taking quite a sensible approach to it, but there's no kind of obvious place that is the great place to go these days, in my view. So you've got Dubai is
Sure.
one that a lot of people are interested in. So they have their own bespoke virtual assets regulator, the Dubai Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, or VARA. And VARA has been set up specifically to regulate crypto firms. So they have a framework that it's not straightforward by any stretch, but it's designed specifically for the crypto industry. So you don't have any kind of weird securities concepts that have been morphed to try and fit crypto assets. So VARA is one that is quite kind of forward thinking. Some people are not as keen on Dubai as a jurisdiction, but from a regulatory perspective, it does make a lot of sense if you want to set up there. A
Have you
lot of
seen
Yeah,
clients incorporate in Dubai or establish a
yeah,
principal office there?
yeah, a lot.
So
Yeah.
it is making inroads, is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
right. There's a huge amount of interest in Dubai, a lot of investment in there as well. The regulatory regime is good. The banking regime is good in terms of being able to get access to bank accounts, which is a big thing, as you know. So that's one, but that's more of a sort of retail play. I would say that Vara is more focused on kind of bigger retail players. Similarly, very close to Dubai, you've got Abu Dhabi, just an hour down the road by car. They've got different regulatory regime. They have in their free zone called the Abu Dhabi Global Market. they have a regulator there, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority. There's a lot of acronyms, the ADGM and the FSRA. They've got a regime that's been in place since 2017, which is basically a security style regime that's been modified for crypto assets. And they're sort of, a lot of people see them as the more kind of institutional side. So there's a number of firms who've gone there to set up institutional focused businesses and get regulated in Abu Dhabi. But that's the Middle East. Places like Singapore continue to be really popular. They
Sure.
have their major payments license, which you get under the Payment Services Act in Singapore to
Sure.
operate a crypto business. They're reasonably forward thinking, but it's not a straightforward license to get. Then you've got some alternatives like some of the Caribbean countries like Bermuda, for example, where the licensing process is more straightforward, and the regime gives you access to a few more in the way of types of activities. So like in Bermuda, you can get what's called a Class F license that gives you access to the ability to carry on spot crypto trading services, but also crypto derivatives in one
Sure.
license, which is quite attractive. So
Why do you
it's
think the
it's a
Middle
mix.
East? Why do you think the Middle East moved so quickly on this, or is trying to establish itself? What is it about? Is it just the amount of money? What is it that's kind of awakened them to let's try to be the worldwide leader in this area?
I think so for a long time, obviously their countries are focused on oil revenue, and they have for the last 10 to 15 years been very focused on diversification of their revenue base. So
Sure.
they've been focusing a lot on on technology primarily as being a way in which they can differentiate themselves. So I think crypto was a pretty obvious way of being able to do it. Alongside, blockchain was another thing which has been big
Sure.
in the region, and AI as well. They're focusing very heavily on being a place where you can invest in generally kind of tech development. So
Sure.
for me, it's been that the political regimes out there mean that it's easier for them to be able to focus quite heavily on particular topics, or
Sure.
they don't have the same processes to go through to do things like set up a bespoke regulator. So it
Sure.
means they can move faster on these things
The
and be a bit
downside of
more effective.
democracy, right?
Yeah. Well, it means they do get things done more quickly,
Yeah.
and that means that they can seize the day on these things. And there is, as well as you said, a huge amount of money there to invest into these types of things, which means that the environment is just good when it comes to startups.
What about products or services that you see that are going to proliferate in the near term, like, next 5 years, 10 years? What do you see as like kind of, okay, these products or services are going to, we're seeing them grow, we're seeing them budding up now, and they have a real market for them, or, kind of traditional services or products that will move on to the blockchain, something like that.
Mhm. So on the former, kind of where what crypto products are really trending at the moment. I mean, what we see is obviously kind of incremental gains in relation to different types of trading products. So things like, for example, whereas a few years ago you were just doing spot trading, buying and selling in your account, now there's things like structured products that enable you to buy like a portfolio of assets, that
Sure.
kind of thing. The other thing that we see within the centralized exchanges is a much more heavy focus on the interaction between CeFi and DeFi, where a lot of clients now they want a CeFi experience, so centralized experience. They want to go through an account with an entity that they can see and touch and who's regulated, but they want to be able to have that DeFi liquidity and the options around trading that DeFi gives you. And that confluence is a very interesting part of what we're doing at the
Hmm.
moment for a number of different clients. How that's regulated is very difficult to work out, because you got an entity that sits in the middle, but then they give you access to a DeFi product. Regulators tend not to want to regulate DeFi, but can they regulate that intermediary layer is a big question at the moment. So that's what we're seeing a lot of at the moment.
I think, I know, Sumit Chugani, and when we were chatting, we had a conversation about, kind of how, KYC and AML regulations will adapt, or excuse me, not adapt, how products will adapt to KYC and AML regulations in the world of DeFi. How to know who's transacting on your platforms, so to adhere to those regulations while at the same time allowing the flexibility and innovation of those products. Any thoughts generally about where we're going to go on that?
That's a very difficult answer, a very difficult question to answer. I think this is one of the things that the regulators are really struggling with at the moment, and obviously a lot of the product providers are very keen not to touch on this topic, frankly.
Sure.
The way that people do it at the moment is, you've probably seen plenty of self-hosted wallets that offer access to
Sure.
decentralized finance solutions. Obviously, a self-hosted wallet doesn't include any KYC layer, so that's the easy way of doing it. As you get more integrated into it, obviously you're going to find clients who want to go through the centralized solution. They have to be KYC'd by definition, and then they access the DEX functionality through that. But there's no obvious way of being able to square that circle, because as we integrate DeFi and CeFi more closely, regulators are going to ask the question, how do you, okay, you can KYC your client, but how do you know that when your client is accessing the DeFi markets, they are not basically trading on the other side from a terrorist organization or something? How
Sure.
can you not prove that they're effectively financing terrorism or supporting money laundering completely unknowingly? But how do we do that, and how do we understand that? Can you really offer that access through a regulated wrapper? And
Sure.
that is still a big question to be answered. The regulators right now, certainly UK, Europe, many other countries, are shying away from regulating DeFi because the question is just too hard right now.
It's too
So
dangerous.
yeah, it sets too many precedents. It would have the way they would try and regulate it would have far too many unintended consequences. And so
Sure.
right now it's a question that they're putting on the back burner. But certainly in the EU, they have a mandate. So we have MiCA, the Markets and Crypto Assets Regulation, that's currently in force as of the end of last year. There is then this proposal already, it's not been written down, but MiCA 2, the next piece of regulation that will either supplement or replace the existing one. And that explicitly is stated that they are going to try and somehow regulate DeFi, but who knows how they're planning on doing that.
Let me ask you something. If you to many Americans at least, this world is still a complete unknown. They don't trade, they don't have a Coinbase account, they don't have a crypto.com account, they're not buying any kind of tokens or playing in this world at all, notwithstanding how much it's encroaching into our mainstream media. And if you talk to many individuals in this world, they think of crypto or Bitcoin as just a way for, terrorists to move money, to launder money, to purchase drugs, to purchase guns, and all the nefarious things that, at one point this world was very well known for. And so my question to you is, you know, how from how valid is that, stereotype? Is it based on something that's really happening, or is it kind of, oh, that's a far flung thing that may have happened in a bygone era, but that's not really what people are doing with these products anymore?
I think what you have to treat the industry as being sort of two sides of the same coin. So the types of businesses that you work for and that I work for are very well run, very well established businesses that are obviously in the market to assist people to trade and hold crypto, or to access other trading products or functionality related to crypto. In my view, the vast majority of the activity that takes place within that world, within crypto, is absolutely above board and very well managed and run these days. The
Sure.
other side of the coin with crypto is the fact that it can also be used, in a completely anonymous environment. And I have no doubt, of course, that it does get used for nefarious purposes as well within another side of the industry that is not nearly as compliant. Hopefully, nobody I've ever met or worked for, of course.
Sure.
But the important thing I think to note is that that's just it's a function of the way that crypto works, that there is always going to be that type of potential to take place.
Sure.
In just the same way, and this doesn't justify it, but in just the same way that you can use cash for nefarious
Sure.
purposes, that doesn't mean that all
Sure.
businesses that take cash are, should be
Doing
tarred
something
with the same
wrong.
brush.
Sure.
They need to have obviously controls around how crypto is used, and travel rule and things like that are important to be able to ensure that financial crime can be detected and controlled and prevented. But I think it's probably an unfair accusation to say that the industry as a whole is just a vector for financial crime, because there is a huge part of it. The vast majority of that activity is legitimate trading or other use cases which are not linked to criminal activity. It just happens to be that crypto can in certain circumstances be used in ways which can benefit criminals. But I think that things are changing on that front, in terms of the ability for criminals to be able to use it for money laundering, etc. That market is, the market around transaction monitoring is getting much more sophisticated.
Sure.
Regulators are getting more sophisticated in relation to understanding nefarious activity, and being able to make sure that their regulated entities are managing and preventing it. So I think over time, actually, what we'll see is that crypto, and I think this is already happening, crypto is actually getting harder and harder to use for nefarious purposes because of the transparency and the increased oversight by regulators that I think ultimately will make it a much safer market than it is today.
We try to market this podcast to not just people who are, fully in the world of crypto, but also those who are kind of curious about it and want to learn more. And I think what I want people to take away from your response is the vast majority of this world is for legitimate purposes. And I think that's a big point, that as that becomes more and more accepted, I think we'll see more and more innovation and more traditional companies moving into this space to access the tools that are available through the blockchain or through some of these products. So I think that's a great point. We're coming here to the end, and what we do here is, you're, obviously based on everything you've said, it's clear that you clearly understand the regulatory environment that, crypto products fall in. But I also want like young lawyers and young entrepreneurs to get a sense of kind of who you are and what are your values and kind of how you ended up here. And so when we do this segment, just basically 5 short answer questions, and just to, thoughts off the top of your head, feel free to elaborate if necessary. If it's one word answer, that's fine too. And the first one that I have for you is, well, that's actually the one I was going to ask you is, what is your curiosity level about coming to the U.S. and taking part in this world? Because you're obviously what I would call an expert in international markets, and a lot of the business, a lot of the innovation, a lot of the money driving these products is here. Have you ever thought about coming here, and what are the things that encourage you to do that, and what are the things that say, nah, I'm quite happy where I am?
So I have a lot of US clients, US based clients. So
Sure.
certainly I have a good reason to come to the US and actually see some people. It's a bit more difficult
Yeah.
actually these days, given pre-COVID, everyone was in the same place. Everyone was in New
Sure.
York or San Francisco. Now they're not. They're everywhere.
They're
I
everywhere.
have to go
Yeah.
to 10 different places. Although I would love to come to Colorado at some point and see you, Cubs. But
Open invite. Open invite.
yeah. But yeah, I think positives. I have a huge number of US clients. I think the negatives are that I'm probably pretty behind the curve compared to a lot of US lawyers in this space, simply because I've not focused on it deliberately. So
Sure.
I've been the guy that doesn't do the US almost. That's been my USP. So I've always wanted to be, if you're a US lawyer that does a lot of work in this space, if you need international support, you come to me. And
Yeah.
that's really been my USP. So I think the reason why I wouldn't want to do any US work is because I'd probably lose that ability to say I'm the guy that doesn't do the US.
So you found your station, like you found your niche. No,
Yeah,
I get it.
it
That
works
makes
well.
complete sense to me. All right, a little bit lighter hearted. What's the best restaurant in London?
There's a place called Gymkhana which basically does really fancy curry.
Really
And it's
fancy. Where curry from where?
I think it's just your classic kind of Indian, but it's called Gymkhana and it's just so good. It's really hard to get into though because it's a tiny restaurant.
A
But
tiny restaurant.
if you
Impossible.
can get
All
it,
right, well, let's note
it's worth
that,
flying
you
over.
know, make your plans far out if you're headed to London.
Exactly.
If you could have one wish and it would come true tomorrow, what would that wish be? Personally,
Uh,
professionally, anything. What comes to your mind?
It's quite a difficult one. I must admit, do I have anything I really desperately need? The one thing I've always thought is that my so whenever we have sort of associates within my team or something sort of say why are we doing this, like, so at Simmons we have we have we don't pay the same as like a big US firm or something. Like our
Sure.
associates could go and get paid twice what they get paid if they want to go to work for Kirkland Ellis, the Sullivan and Cromwell or something, and they're good
Sure.
enough to do that, but they choose to work at Simmons. and they choose that for a reason, and the reason is because of the sort of mindset and the ethos of the firm. It's a very different firm to a lot of other places. And I think a lot of people, when teams come to me and they kind of say, I don't really get this question asked directly, but the conversation turns to kind of, why really are we doing this? And for me, the answer has always been, I do it because I want to be able to build a team that, like, where everyone gets the opportunity to kind of live their lives in a really, in a really fulfilling way. And for
Sure.
me, the work is sort of, it's about being able to create that kind of team structure. So for me, I guess the biggest wish is I want to keep growing the team so that we can have more people who are, successful and who can really kind of, make something of themselves in this sector or in any others. But it's sort of trying to use some of what I started to build and then have been, worked with a ton of other people to create this incredible practice. I want to be able to get more people into that so that everyone else can kind of share in the benefits that we've achieved, really.
How big is your crypto practice at Simmons and Simmons? How many people?
So we don't have a formal kind of group.
Sure.
Like it's not like, someone says, "Hi, I'm in the crypto practice."
Sure.
It's a grouping of individuals from across different teams. So in the UK, we've got I think we've got about 4 partners who focus on it almost exclusively. We then have a number of associates below that, probably at least kind of 10 or 12 below that, who either exclusive or very, very heavily involved. And then across Europe, we've got at least one partner in every single one of our offices, which is
Wow.
Italy, France, Belgium, Spain, Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg. I think that's it.
Is it
And
fair to say that all started with you in 2015?
Yeah, I was the first one to do
That's
it.
incredible.
Yeah,
What a legacy you're leaving.
yeah. I mean, I do like the fact that the work is really interesting and that people like to do it.
Yeah.
So, when you have younger people come into the team, they quite often will sort of gravitate to wanting to do this work because it is a little bit different and unusual. The clients are unusual and much more, in my view,
Oh,
much
I
more
know. I
interesting.
know.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we do have there's a lot of opportunity to grow simply because people want to be part of that team and because we are a successful team and we do great work and I'd say we're some of the best in the world at it. I think that people do want to be part of that success. So yeah, it's been great to be able to grow that team across the
It's
years.
amazing. All right, next question. What is your favorite moment each day?
Well, there's probably a cheesy one, which is I only get this when I'm working from home, but when the children arrive back from school, that's always nice.
Yeah.
They arrived back actually whilst we were on this. I could hear them in the background as they arrived home. But that's always a big one. I think the other one for me, if we're talking about kind of more of a work thing, is I always say about crypto that it gets me up in the morning, but it also keeps me awake at night. Kind of going back to what you said earlier, Cubs, about kind of the stress of operating in a world of where there is no obvious answers. But I
Sure.
really, really enjoy, and do get this quite a lot of days. I really enjoy that kind of, the client says, we've got this new thing. How should we play this? Which way should we go? And that ability to be able to help them to shape the strategy for that kind of stuff. When it comes to stuff like new product launches or dealing with a regulator, that kind of the satisfaction that comes from kind of working together with the client to create a strategy that is, I think is going to work as a result of the sort of the experience we have and from the work we've done in the past and that kind of thing. I think just brings me a lot of satisfaction. I think it's just a nice thing to be able to work really closely with these clients and deliver some cool stuff, which isn't what
That's
you get to
that's
do so much in private practice. I think we work so closely with product teams, like you do the same, like on structure, for example. You really feel like you're actually helping to launch the product rather than just being
sure.
asked specific questions so that in-house lawyers can do it themselves. Sometimes you feel like you're really in-house with them.
I couldn't agree more. I feel like those relationships are kind of why I choose this area. It's fun. It feels like we're working together. We're not working for each other, and we're both have this goal of building and launching this product. So I get it. This next one is, and I'm not asking you to get political here at all. You know, as you see the U.S. market open up, okay, in this world, the regulations are getting established, and I can tell you that the people making decisions here are the smartest in this country. Like they're making great decisions, they're putting great groups together and having discussions to move this world forward. So my question is that I also think there are some negative things coming out of the current administration, and I'm very curious about how people outside the country are viewing what's happened inside the country. And so my question is very simple. With the things that I think are beneficial in the crypto world, measured against some of the things that I think are very negative in terms of international relations and, international issues that are happening, is it worth it? Like, is it worth it?
I mean, I think the perception that we have from over this side of the Atlantic is that there's going to be a lot of good stuff that comes out of the deregulation that we're seeing in the US. But deregulation is such a dangerous thing at the same time. We've already seen some quite interesting activities taking place in the crypto sector in the US. I was I was really, really hopeful that we would see a sensible sort of moves around deregulation in the US that would mean that the EU and the UK would follow and essentially see that that was a sensible way of being able to regulate. We don't need
Sure.
to have our hands around the throat of the industry quite so much. And I think that is still possible, but there is a danger that things go too far in the US and actually the UK and the EU say, actually, we don't want any part of that. That doesn't look like something we want to have in over this side. So I think in reality, what we're going to see, personally, I think we're going to see an increased retrenchment on this side of the fence, because I think we're probably going to be looking at the US as a bit of a petri dish of what happens if we deregulate. Plus, in the UK and the EU, there's no such thing as deregulation. Things just get harder and harder. So we're just not going to see it. So is it worth it? Very difficult to say. I think in reality, it's going to be great for our industry overall. I've seen a huge benefits that come from it, just from the amount of work that we've been getting and the amount of excitement within our clients and the amount of cool stuff they're doing. It's great. But I worry kind of where some of the stuff might end up.
Where it'll backstop. Well, listen, the last question I have for you is kind of what I ask all our guests, and kind of why I started this podcast in the first place. Is this is geared at young lawyers, young entrepreneurs, young business people, anybody who's trying to grow something, a practice, a clientele base, a new company, a new product, a new service. What is one piece of advice you have for somebody in that position?
So one thing I think that really helped me when I was starting off, so 2015, 2016, I was getting introduced to people, or I was going out there and trying to find people to talk to. And I think the one thing that I did, which I just relentlessly spoke to absolutely everyone. I just made connections with people all the time, even if I felt like there was no way that they were ever going to generate work for me. It's always good to know people in the industry that you're targeting. So I just met everybody. I spoke to everyone. I established connections. 99% of those people never sent me a dime of work directly, but a good number of them, probably introduced me to other people who did,
Sure.
or they taught me something that I took to the next meeting. And I remember in 2015, 2016, every meeting I had, I was learning on the job as I went, because, as you said at the start of the podcast, this stuff changes so quickly. I mean, for anyone who remembers the crypto industry back then, it was crazy what was going on. And so you just couldn't keep up. So I was taking everything I learned in speaking to one person, I'd go to the next meeting and I'd use that in that meeting. And as long as I knew 10% more than the people I was meeting, I sounded like a genius. And so it was like I just constantly used that strategy of learning on the job, meeting people, understanding, creating that network. It didn't pay off for a couple of years. It took a long time for this stuff to start making, actually making bucks. But the reality is that it paid off big in the end, because that network has been what sustained me. So the work I do now is obviously all the big clients I have, they introduce me to other people. I get work from people that I met way back in 2015, 16, who now work for the big centralized exchanges, or they've gone and set up their own operations. And just knowing these people has been fantastic. The real kind of, the one thing I think what opened my eyes once was when, I can't remember when it was, probably a couple of years ago, somebody got in touch with me to say that they had been recommended to speak to me. And they said, oh, this person recommended you. And I didn't even know who that person was. And so I was like, wow, like actually somebody knows my name and I don't know who they are, which sounds really arrogant.
That's a nice
actually,
feeling. Yeah, that's a nice feeling.
It felt like maybe I'd managed to get my name out there enough so that people kind of knew I was someone that might be worth speaking to. And that was a really nice thing.
Well, that is awesome. And I think that is an amazing piece of advice. And I hope young people heard that, because I feel like that is probably one of the things that I would say about, here's what you do, is go out and chat with people, go out and meet people and build relationships. So we're here to our final segment. And if you haven't listened, which I'm sure you're going to subscribe now going forward, George, is, we do this final segment. And what I try to do is everybody that comes on the podcast is somebody that I have worked with, had a relationship with in some fashion or form in the past. And what I try to do is I'm a big believer in that I can learn from everybody that I've ever interacted with. And what I try to do is tell a story about, here's what I took away from this experience. And with George, it's so easy. And the reason it's easy is because, if somebody asks me for a European counselor or, somebody that can take them international, I always recommend George. And the reason is because in working with him for several months, there is just this calmness, temperament, rational thinking, kind of a way about approaching problems. It's very easy when you're navigating, the laws of many different countries and you're building a product that has different nuances to it to get a little bit overwhelmed. And I think a lot of lawyers, they try to grab onto the piece that they understand and then give an answer based on that singular piece while it doesn't really solve the entire problem. I think you have to look at the entire landscape and then from there kind of build up to your solution. And I got to witness that with George specifically. And it was actually confirmed because George and I and another attorney who was working with us, Eric, got to have dinner in London or lunch in London. I remember that. And it just kind of confirmed in meeting him in person that this temperament is something that I think is probably, and whether he knows it or not, one of the sources of his success. He's very easy to chat with, and he gives you a lot of confidence in the way he thinks about things that he will deliver a solution or a path to getting where you're trying to go. And I think as I've practiced since that experience, I'm always trying to think how I can formulate a response in the same way that I saw George did. And I think I appreciate that lesson that I've taken from you. It's meant a lot, and I really value our relationship, and I look forward to getting back on board and representing some clients together. So let's figure out a way to make that happen. And more than anything else, I look forward to Gymkhana with you in London next time I'm over across the pond.
Excellent plan, Kubs. Yeah. Well, thank you.
I really appreciate you jumping on. For the listeners, we're out next week because I am lecturing at Cornell, but I will be back the following week with a new guest, and we appreciate you joining, and thank you to our sponsors. Appreciate it.